For decades, the world has heard one story about Iran, told in whispers, through headlines, and often through fear. But tonight, we go beyond the noise. We uncover the deeper truth, not just about politics, but about people, power, and the future of an ancient nation. Stay with me, because this isn't just Iran's story, it's a story that affects us all. My fellow citizens of the world, every once in a while we must pause, step back from the noise, and ask, what don't we know about the places we think we understand the most? Tonight we talk about Iran, not just as a headline, not just as a geopolitical actor, but as a nation with a soul, a story, and a destiny. When most people hear the name Iran, they immediately think of what they've seen in the media: nuclear negotiations, political unrest, sanctions, and fiery speeches from the podiums of power. But this narrative, while loud and persistent, tells only a fragment of the truth. It is a surface-level image painted by decades of political tension and international mistrust. Beneath that surface lies a far richer, deeper identity. An Iran that is far older than its revolution, far more nuanced than its regime, and far more human than the headlines would have us believe. Iran is not just a country, it is a civilization. And civilizations are not measured by policies or presidents. They are measured by the resilience of their culture, the depth of their contributions, and the richness of their people's spirit. To truly understand Iran, one must first look back, not just to 1979 when the Islamic Revolution took place, but thousands of years before that. This land, once known as Persia, has stood as a cradle of human advancement. It gave the world some of its earliest forms of law under the rule of Cyrus the Great, who authored the Cyrus Cylinder, considered by many to be the first declaration of human rights. Long before the rise of European enlightenment, Persian scholars were advancing mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and poetry. The works of Rumi, Hafez, Sadi, and Ferdowsi still echo across the globe today, reminding us that Persian culture has always been built not only on strength, but also on wisdom, creativity, and the pursuit of beauty. The architecture of ancient Persepolis, the majestic domes of Esfahan, and the intricate art of Persian miniature painting all speak of a society that has valued knowledge and elegance in equal measure. This legacy continues in quiet defiance of the modern narrative. Step into the streets of Shiraz or the bazaars of Tabriz, and you'll see a world that refuses to be flattened into stereotypes. Here, generations of artisans still practice ancient crafts with the same techniques passed down over centuries. Women weave carpets that carry the symbols of their ancestors. Men shape copper and clay into objects that reflect not only utility, but pride. And in the background, the call to prayer mingles with the notes of a classical tar or sitar, echoing a spiritual harmony far more layered than any one ideology can explain. But Iran's identity is not only ancient, it is alive. Its culture evolves even under pressure. Iranian filmmakers have won awards across international festivals, not because they have freedom, but because their talent breaks through the boundaries placed around it. Directors like Asghar Farhadi tell stories that resonate with universal human emotions, despite the censorship they face at home. Their work illustrates something profoundly human. Even when the world narrows your voice, the truth finds a way to speak. Consider the Iranian diaspora. Millions of Iranians living across Europe, the United States, and beyond. Many left the country following political turmoil, but few left behind their heritage. In Los Angeles, often called Tehrangeles, Persian culture thrives in cafes, bookstores, and family gatherings. The Nowruz, Persian New Year celebrations in Toronto or London are filled with second-generation Iranians dancing to traditional music, reading poetry aloud, and laying out half-seen tables, a ritual that connects them back to a homeland they may not have seen since childhood. This is Iran, too, not a place of conflict, but of continuity. Perhaps most moving of all is the Iranian people's relationship with language. Farsi, their poetic tongue, is not just a tool for communication, but a vessel of soul. It's a language that has survived invasions, empires, and modern restrictions. Even today, Farsi poetry is memorized by heart, quoted in conversations, and used to teach children values of patience, honor, and love. You'll find taxi drivers in Tehran quoting Hafez as easily as political pundits discuss policy. That love for beauty and language tells us something essential about Iranian identity. It is reflective, introspective, and deeply human. What the world often forgets is that Iran's identity cannot be boxed into a binary of East versus West, fundamentalism versus freedom. It is a mosaic, layered, textured, at times contradictory, but always alive. Iran is as much about its scholars as it is about its soldiers, as much about the grandmother reciting Rumi to her grandchild in the garden as it is about the protester chanting in the streets. It is not a monolith, it is a living, breathing people with dreams, disappointments, and a deep hunger to be understood beyond the labels placed upon them. And when we take the time to see this deeper Iran, we discover that its destiny, like its identity, has never been a question of survival, but of expression. The story of Iran cannot be told without acknowledging the deep entanglement of power, pride, and pain. Three forces that have shaped not only its modern identity, but also its historical narrative. These are not just abstract concepts in Iran's case. They are living, breathing realities. They pulse through every decision its leaders make, every speech that reaches the world stage, and every act of resistance that rises from its streets. For Iran, power has often been a necessity, pride a defense mechanism, and pain an inheritance. Together, they form the backdrop of a nation still navigating the long, difficult journey between isolation and influence. Power in Iran is not only political, it is also psychological. It is rooted in the memory of lost sovereignty, the scars of colonial manipulation, and the collective trauma of foreign interference. The most formative example of this is the 1953 CIA and MI6-backed coup that overthrew Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, a democratically elected leader who had dared to nationalize Iran's oil industry. That moment, when a foreign power decided that Iran's economic independence was too dangerous to be allowed, was not simply a political maneuver, it was a national humiliation. For many Iranians, it symbolized the theft of their voice. And from that point on, power was no longer just about governance, it became about reclaiming dignity. This helps explain why, after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran's leadership moved quickly to consolidate power in every corner of its society. From education to the judiciary, from the streets to the military, control became synonymous with survival. The revolution itself, though fueled by a mix of political ideologies, eventually hardened into an ideology of its own, one that saw Western interference as an existential threat and internal dissent as potential sabotage. The establishment of the Islamic Republic wasn't just a political shift, it was a statement, a declaration that Iran would never again allow its destiny to be written by outsiders. But this newfound power came with a high cost. Pride, long a point of cultural strength, began to morph into political rigidity. Iran's pride is not a simple matter of nationalism. It is rooted in a civilizational confidence. This is a country that sees itself not only as a regional actor, but as a historical empire, a center of culture, and a guardian of spiritual truth. Yet when pride becomes entangled with paranoia, it breeds isolation. This is evident in the years following the revolution, when Iran, rather than opening itself up to the world as a redefined nation, doubled down on ideological purity. It severed ties, resisted cooperation, and positioned itself in opposition to many of the global norms that define diplomacy. Pride demanded that Iran not bow to pressure, but the unintended result was that the country increasingly found itself cut off, economically, politically, and even culturally, from much of the international community. That isolation has caused pain, not just to Iran's economy or its global reputation, but to its people. The economic sanctions imposed over decades, particularly in response to Iran's nuclear program, have crippled industries, slashed incomes, and driven inflation to crushing levels. Yet the pain goes deeper than empty shelves or devalued currency. It's in the aspirations denied, the dreams postponed, the connections to the outside world that feel just out of reach. Ask a young engineer in Mashhad, a medical student in Yazd, or a software developer in Shiraz, they will tell you the same story. They want opportunity, growth, and recognition. But too often they are left to navigate a system that punishes ambition unless it aligns with the prevailing ideology. One only needs to look at the wave of protests that have swept Iran in recent years to understand how deeply that pain runs. Whether it was the Green Movement in 2009, the fuel protests in 2019, or the mass demonstrations following the death of Mahsa Amini in 2022, the message has been consistent. The people are demanding to be seen, heard, and respected. They are not rejecting their heritage, their religion, or their country. They are rejecting the suffocation of their spirit. These uprisings are not just political acts, they are emotional outbursts, the eruption of long-suppressed pain buried under decades of prideful silence and the relentless exertion of state power. And yet, in each of these moments, each time the streets fill with voices and the air thickens with tension, there is also something else present, a paradox. For all the control that Iran's leadership seeks to hold on to, and for all the pride it clings to on the world stage, there is a vulnerability at the core of its identity. The power it projects is often a shield for that vulnerability. The pride it asserts is often a reaction to wounds not yet healed, and the pain, persistent and raw, is what connects the nation's past to its uncertain, unfolding future. To speak of Iran solely in terms of its government or geopolitical stance is to do a grave injustice to its people, a population too often misunderstood, misrepresented, or simply ignored in the global narrative. The Iranian people are not a mirror of their government, nor are they a monolith. They are a mosaic of artists, engineers, farmers, scientists, women in headscarves and women protesting them, elders who remember monarchy and youth who've only known theocracy. Yet despite this diversity, one thread unites them. They are a people defined not by power but by resilience. And that resilience has too often been mistaken for consent, that silence for apathy, and that pride for extremism. In truth, they are a population whose voices have been drowned out by louder, more sensational sound bites, but whose daily lives tell a story of complexity, humanity, and quiet strength. The outside world has long viewed Iran through a narrow and distorted lens. Turn on the news in any Western country, and the imagery is predictable. Angry protests, fiery speeches, rows of men chanting slogans, and the looming symbol of nuclear ambition. But beyond that veil is a society that continues to live, dream, and create, often in spite of the restrictions it faces. In cities like Tehran and Esfahan, university classrooms buzz with discussions of literature and philosophy. Young women juggle their academic ambitions with the cultural expectations placed on them, many finding quiet forms of rebellion in fashion, language, and self-expression. In cafes hidden behind modest shop fronts, writers and musicians gathered to explore ideas, often coded in metaphor and poetry to avoid censorship. These are not scenes of fanaticism. These are scenes of a people trying to breathe within limits, not of their choosing. Misunderstanding arises when people are stripped of context. For example, the compulsory hijab law is often cited as a defining feature of Iranian society. But what the world often fails to see is the nuance in how Iranian women respond to that law. Some comply, others resist. Some push the boundaries in subtle ways, through color, fabric, or attitude. And many engage in a quiet but powerful form of civil disobedience, removing their headscarves in public, knowing the risks, yet driven by a deep desire for autonomy. These acts are not just about dress codes. They are about identity, dignity, and choice. And they reveal a truth the headlines ignore. The Iranian woman is not silent. She is courageous in the face of a system that tries to define her without her consent. The same goes for the youth of Iran, who make up a significant portion of the population. These are young men and women who have grown up under sanctions, international isolation, and internal repression. Yet they are remarkably connected to the world thanks to the internet, even when it's throttled, filtered, or blocked. They follow global trends, listen to hip-hop, study AI, launch tech startups, and express themselves on social media platforms that are often banned in their own country. They are not sheltered from the world. They are in conversation with it. And they're not waiting for permission to catch up. They're already pushing forward, often ahead of what their environment allows. Their creativity, their defiance, and their sense of humor, visible in everything from viral memes to underground art, form a quiet revolution, one rooted in persistence rather than violence. It is important to note that misunderstanding the Iranian people isn't just a cultural error. It has political consequences. When global leaders conflate the people with the policies of the state, it results in isolationist strategies that hurt ordinary Iranians. Sanctions, though targeted on paper, often bleed into everyday life, raising the cost of medicine, limiting access to essential goods, and suffocating opportunities. And yet, the same people who suffer these consequences continue to extend warmth and hospitality in their homes. Stories abound of travelers to Iran who expected hostility and found generosity instead, being invited to dinner by strangers, offered help in the street, or gifted items simply as a show of goodwill. These are not isolated acts. They reflect a culture that places deep value on hospitality, empathy, and human connection. And perhaps the greatest misunderstanding of all is the assumption that the Iranian people are passively enduring their fate. The truth is far more complicated. They are constantly negotiating between loyalty and dissent, between survival and expression, between tradition and progress. Some support the system, others oppose it, and many are caught somewhere in between, balancing personal faith with a desire for reform, national pride with an urge for global connection. Their silence is not always agreement. Often it is exhaustion. Their endurance is not complacency. It is a form of courage, a quiet determination to carve out meaning, purpose, and hope within a society that does not always allow them to speak freely or live fully. Few topics have defined Iran's modern relationship with the world more than its nuclear program. For decades, headlines have screamed warnings, politicians have issued dire predictions, and international bodies have scrambled to control what many see as a looming threat. But amid all the noise, there lies a deeper, more complex truth, one that cannot be captured in press releases or rhetorical sound bites. The nuclear question is not simply a matter of uranium enrichment or centrifuge counts. It is a story of national pride, strategic leverage, historical betrayal, global mistrust, and the fragile hope that diplomacy can still triumph over fear. The international conversation around Iran's nuclear ambitions has been dominated by assumptions, often fueled more by suspicion than substance, more by political calculation than verified fact. To truly understand the issue, one must peel back the layers of propaganda and perception to examine what is actually at stake, not just for Iran, but for the entire world. Iran's pursuit of nuclear technology dates back to the 1950s under the Shah, and ironically, it began with the support of the United States through the Atoms for Peace program. Back then, the ambition was framed as peaceful, an effort to modernize Iran's energy sector and bring the country into the fold of scientific progress. After the Islamic Revolution in 1979, however, everything changed. The West's support evaporated overnight, and what was once a shared technological dream became a symbol of independence and resistance. The Islamic Republic, suddenly cut off from international cooperation, turned inward and began to pursue nuclear development on its own terms. From that moment forward, the nuclear program was no longer just about energy. It became a statement, a defiant gesture toward a world that had treated Iran as an outcast. To many Iranians, the nuclear program is a source of national pride. It represents self-sufficiency, scientific achievement, and resilience in the face of sanctions and isolation. In a country where foreign interference has often dictated domestic outcomes, from the 1953 coup to decades of economic pressure, nuclear advancement is seen not merely as strategic, but as a form of redemption. It sends a message that Iran, despite being targeted, vilified, and pressured, will not bow to global powers. This sense of pride is essential to understanding why the program continues to have support inside the country, even among those who may not agree with the regime itself. For them, it's not about bombs, it's about sovereignty. But the international community, particularly the West, views the issue through a lens of fear. The possibility of a nuclear-armed Iran triggers a cascade of anxieties about regional instability, an arms race in the Middle East, and the potential for catastrophic conflict. Israel, which has long viewed Iran as an existential threat, has made it clear that it will not allow Tehran to cross the nuclear threshold. The United States, too, has used both diplomatic and covert means to slow Iran's progress, including cyber attacks and intelligence operations. The justification for these actions is built around a central claim that Iran cannot be trusted, that its leadership, driven by ideology and hostility, poses too great a risk to be allowed nuclear capability. However, the reality is not so binary. Multiple assessments by the U.S. intelligence community have found that while Iran has pursued nuclear capabilities, it has not made a definitive decision to build a weapon. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, signed in 2015, was an attempt to bridge the chasm of fear and fact. Under the deal, Iran agreed to strict limits on its nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. International inspectors were granted unprecedented access. The program was slowed, monitored, and by most expert accounts, placed under meaningful control. Yet even this diplomatic success was short-lived. In 2018, the United States unilaterally withdrew from the agreement, reimposing sanctions and undermining trust. Iran, in turn, resumed some of its nuclear activities, not in secret, but in full view, making a clear political statement. If diplomacy is not honored, neither will compliance be. The tragedy of the nuclear question lies in the fact that both sides feel justified. Iran believes it has been bullied, cornered, and treated unfairly despite adhering to agreements. The West believes it has been deceived, manipulated, and must act preemptively to avoid catastrophe. This cycle of mistrust feeds itself. Every step forward is followed by suspicion. Every negotiation is shadowed by fear. And in the middle of it all are the Iranian people, those who suffer most from the consequences of sanctions, who bear the brunt of economic hardship, and who have the least say in their country's nuclear strategy. They are the collateral in a global chess game where fear is often mistaken for strategy and facts are buried under layers of historical baggage. Yet there are examples that hint at what is possible when fear gives way to engagement. The JCPOA proved that diplomacy, however imperfect, can work when both sides are willing to make compromises. The presence of inspectors, the reduction of enriched uranium stockpiles, and the halting of advanced centrifuge installation, all of these were tangible, verifiable outcomes. But sustaining such progress requires more than paperwork. It demands political courage, long-term vision, and the willingness to see the other not as a threat, but as a partner with legitimate concerns. The nuclear question, at its heart, is a mirror. It reflects the world's deepest insecurities, but also its greatest potential for cooperation. If the story of Iran is one of resilience, contradiction, and complexity, then it is its youth who carry the burden of those contradictions and the promise of what comes next. In a country where over 60% of the population is under the age of 35, the young are not a fringe. They are the pulse. They are the ones born after the revolution, after the war with Iraq, after the fiery speeches and ideological fervor that defined an earlier generation. They have grown up in a country that often looks backward while they look forward, in a society caught between dogma and dreams, and it is in their hands that the hope for a different Iran quietly and sometimes defiantly burns. These young people have inherited a nation of breathtaking potential and crippling limitations. They have access to education, yet limited access to opportunity. They are connected to the global world through the internet, yet disconnected by censorship and sanctions. And in that duality, they are shaping something new, a modern Iranian identity that neither rejects the past nor blindly accepts it. Walk through the corridors of Sharif University of Technology in Tehran or the medical schools of Mashhad, and you'll find a generation immersed in science, innovation, and possibility. These are students coding artificial intelligence, designing renewable energy systems, and studying robotics, not in search of escape, but in search of elevation. They believe that knowledge can be their vehicle out of stagnation. Many speak fluent English, consume global media, and are well versed in the same cultural currents that shape cities like Berlin or San Francisco. They are not naive to their circumstances. They know they live under a government that limits freedoms and in an economy strained by sanctions. But rather than retreat into bitterness, many channel their frustrations into ingenuity. The startup scene in Iran, despite systemic barriers, has quietly blossomed. Young entrepreneurs have built platforms for ride-sharing, food delivery, online education, and fintech. They are using the digital world to bypass the limitations of the physical one, proving that constraint can sometimes be the birthplace of creativity. But it's not just in technology or academia that the youth of Iran are making their mark. It's in their art, their music, their words. In underground studios in Tehran, rappers speak truth to power in coded lyrics. In indie films, young directors explore social issues through allegory and metaphor, navigating censorship with artistry. In fashion, women experiment with bold colors and styles, subtly bending the rules imposed on them. The act of expression, whether through a verse, a visual, or a dance, is, for many, an act of resistance, a way of reclaiming identity in a system that has tried to define it for them. And with every brushstroke, every lyric, every hidden beat, they are telling the world, we are more than our politics. We are more than your headlines. Nowhere is this generational shift more evident than in the protest movements that have erupted in recent years. When 22-year-old Mahsa Amini died in police custody in 2022, it was young people, especially women, who filled the streets. Their chants were not just demands for justice. They were declarations of dignity. Their faces, defiant and determined, became the face of a new Iran, unafraid, unfiltered, unwilling to remain silent. These protests were not just about one incident or one law. They were about decades of accumulated frustration. And though the crackdowns were brutal, the message was unmistakable. The youth of Iran are no longer waiting for permission to be free. They are asserting their place, shaping their narrative, and challenging the machinery of repression not with weapons, but with will. Education plays a central role in this transformation. Literacy rates in Iran are among the highest in the region, and the country boasts more female university students than male, a statistic that speaks volumes about the aspirations of young women. They are studying law, medicine, engineering, and the arts, not just as career paths, but as instruments of empowerment. And even in the face of professional uncertainty and systemic bias, they persist. They are building lives out of fragments, constructing futures out of limitation. For many, the dream is not just personal success, it's societal change. They want an Iran where religion is not coercion, where politics is not suppression, and where culture is not confinement but celebration. In family homes, dorm rooms, and online forums, these young Iranians debate philosophy, dream about travel, and discuss reform. They engage in quiet acts of rebellion, not because they want to destroy their nation, but because they want to redeem it. They are not ashamed of their heritage, they are inspired by it. They are not rejecting Iran, they are trying to remake it in a form that reflects both its ancient wisdom and modern spirit. And even though they are often met with resistance, intimidation, and hardship, they do not stop. Because hope, once awakened, is hard to silence. It lives in their conversations, their convictions, their creations. And though the road ahead remains uncertain, one truth is becoming clear with each passing year. If change comes to Iran, it will be because its young people dared to imagine it, and dared even more to demand it. In a world fractured by conflict, politics, and mistrust, it's tempting to look at countries like Iran as isolated cases, unique challenges to be managed, threats to be contained, or adversaries to be outmaneuvered. But this perspective, though convenient, is dangerously incomplete. Iran is not a distant issue that exists outside the orbit of global affairs. Its fate is intimately tied to the rest of the world, economically, culturally, and politically. Its rise or collapse will not occur in a vacuum. And the choices we make today and how we speak about Iran, how we deal with its leaders, and how we regard its people will echo far beyond the boundaries of the Middle East. The truth is, Iran's destiny is not its own alone. It is interwoven with our shared future, and how we treat that reality reflects not only our foreign policy, but our collective morality. This shared destiny begins with geography, but extends into history. Iran sits at the crossroads of Asia and the Arab world, of ancient empires and modern ideologies. It has long served as a cultural bridge, a place where East met West, where science flourished alongside spirituality, and where diverse civilizations traded ideas as well as goods. When we think of global progress, we cannot ignore Iran's historical role in shaping it. From pioneering thinkers in mathematics and medicine to the timeless wisdom of Persian poets, Iran has always contributed to the world's intellectual and moral treasury. To view this country today merely through the lens of conflict is to ignore centuries of connection, collaboration, and influence that have tied Iran to the rest of humanity. Yet modern narratives tend to overlook this context. Instead, Iran is frequently cast as the other, an unpredictable player, a looming threat. And in doing so, the world reinforces the isolation that has become one of Iran's deepest wounds. But no nation, no matter how inward it may appear, exists outside the consequences of global systems. Climate change doesn't recognize national borders, and Iran, with its severe water shortages and environmental crises, is just as vulnerable to these shifts as any Western country. Pandemics like COVID-19 expose the fragility of national isolation, reminding us that the well-being of one population inevitably affects the health of another. Economies, too, are deeply entangled. Sanctions may be intended to punish governments, but their ripple effects hurt global markets, disrupt supply chains, and deepen the suffering of ordinary people far removed from the decisions that sparked the conflict in the first place. Moreover, security in the 21st century cannot be defined merely by missiles and military alliances. It is built on stability, inclusion, and mutual respect. A destabilized Iran, economically battered, socially fractured, and politically cornered, creates conditions ripe for extremism, displacement, and regional chaos. But an Iran engaged in diplomacy, empowered by a thriving middle class, and integrated into the global community offers a very different outcome. The choice between those two paths does not rest with Tehran alone. It rests with Washington, with Brussels, with Riyadh, with Tel Aviv, with every capital that has a stake in the balance of power in the region. And it rests with us as global citizens, to reject caricatures, to demand truth, and to pressure leaders toward engagement over enmity. This shared destiny is most evident in the hearts and aspirations of the people. Across Iran, there are millions who dream not of dominance, but of dignity. They want to work, to create, to travel, to live without fear. They want to raise families in peace, not in perpetual uncertainty. And these dreams are not uniquely Iranian. They mirror the same hopes that young people hold in Los Angeles, Lagos, Lahore, or London. The need for connection, purpose, opportunity, and safety, these are universal. And when we recognize that universality, when we choose empathy over fear, we begin to see Iran not as a foreign problem, but as part of a global family struggling through generational challenges. These shared struggles, economic inequality, generational divides, political mistrust, aren't confined to any one nation. They are symptoms of a world grappling with rapid change, and they require solutions rooted in unity, not division. Even in the darkest chapters of international relations, there are moments when people have reached across boundaries and built bridges. The Iran nuclear deal was one such moment. It wasn't perfect, but it proved that diplomacy is not naive. It is necessary. That trust, once broken, can be slowly rebuilt. And that progress, even when threatened, can still be defended. The world doesn't have to agree with everything Iran stands for in order to believe that its people deserve a better future. It doesn't have to condone every decision to believe that conversation is better than conflict. In our most honest moments, we know that global peace is not won through dominance. It's won through understanding, patience, and the courage to see our reflection even in those we've been taught to fear. So, as we stand at the edge of a world that is changing faster than ever, shaped by technology, challenged by conflict, and tested by division, we must ask ourselves a deeper question. What kind of future do we want to share? Not just for ourselves, but for generations to come, because the story of Iran is not just about diplomacy or disagreement. It is about people, it is about history, and it is about the possibilities that still remain when we choose to listen instead of label, to engage instead of isolate, and to see beyond the shadows into the shared humanity that binds us all.